Since WoW's launch, there have been 3 new classes added: Death Knights, Monks, and Demon Hunters. All 3 are also melee classes, so we're kinda overdue for a new range class. Especially since we actually managed to lose a range spec in Legion. But what class could even be added? Quite a bit actually, and this list will go over the 10 most likely, either classes that could be added, or even just a 4 spec added to an existing class. At number 10 we've got Dark Rangers and Shadow Hunters. Both are very different, but both are also pretty similar to Hunters. Dark Rangers are basically just super elite Forsaken Hunters, as the only Dark Rangers in game are Sylvanas, Nathanos, and their elite guard. The main difference between a Dark Ranger and a Hunter is that Dark Rangers use shadow magic instead of nature, can stealth, use dark poisons, and mind control. So they're like a mix of Hunters, Rogues, and I guess a little bit of Shadow Priests. Shadow Hunters are the super elite Troll Hunters, and only the best trolls can become one, with the most notable Shadow Hunter being Vol'jin himself. Like Dark Rangers, Shadow Hunters are more of a combination of different classes, as Shadow Hunters are more like Hunters, Shamans, and Priests put together. They use glaives, bows, or polearms to fight with, they can heal and hex, plus they can use shadow magic through the use of the Loa, just like Shadow Priest trolls. So while Dark Rangers are kinda like rogue hunters, Shadow Hunters are more like priest hunters, and both are already established parts of the game and lore, with notable figures in lore practicing both. So if a new hunter spec would be added, either of these could be a possibility. At number 9, we've got Bards. Bards are an incredibly widely used class in other fantasy games, but somewhat absent from WoW for whatever reason. There are some bards in game already, like this random dwarf bard in the Rogue Order Hall, but no major lore characters are currently bards. In Heroes of the Storm, a Warcraft hero named ETC is essentially a tank bard, who specializes in buffing teammates with attack speed while disrupting his opponents with a plethora of stunts. And he even has a self-heal for good measure. In traditional fantasy games, bards are generally pure support roles, but can also heal and do damage if need be. But with a tank bard in Heroes of the Storm, a bard could easily be given all 3 roles to choose from. Now as to how a bard would play, well, pretty much the same as any other class I'd assume, only with music-themed attacks and spells. There are so many different ways Blizzard could implement them that I'm not even going to try and list them. But I'd assume a standard with all the specs would be to have some kind of way to inspire your teammates and buff them constantly. Funny enough, in 2008, Blizzard released an April Fool's Day post saying that Bards would be the second hero class added after Death Knights, and shows screenshots of Bards being forced to play a version of Guitar Hero to use their abilities. At number 8, we have Titanborns, or an Avatar class. A Titanborn class could be a more extreme version of BM Hunters or Demolocks. Basically, an Avatar would be a Titan construct you control, which could have a model of a Titan Keeper or a Titan Avatar, and your job as the player would be to buff it and tell it what to do, as well as train it to specialize in like fire, frost, or nature magic. Similar to Rexxar in Heroes of the Storm, where Misha is the one that goes in and does everything, while Rexxar plays more of a support role of healing her up and attacking from range and trying not to die. The biggest difference from other pet classes would be that the Avatar is where a huge majority of your damage comes from, and you'd basically just use it to fight for you, similar to how Hunters use the ability Kill Command, where with Kill Command, the Hunter uses the ability, and it uses the Hunter's global cooldown, but the pet is the one who actually performs the action, and has to be in range to do it. Or how the Unholy DKs have a cooldown to transform their pet into a monstrosity for a limited duration. Everything would be about the pet, and all of the tools are already in place for that to happen. Now I have to admit, this is probably the least likely of all the classes on this list to actually happen. I just kinda like the idea more than Dark Rangers or Bards. Next up at number 7, we've got Time Mages, or Battle Mages. Battle Mages are pretty straightforward. Think a Death Knight, but with mage abilities. Blizzard wouldn't even have to work very hard to put them in, and it's a very requested spec. Now, Time Mages, or Chronomancers, as they're called in some other games, would basically just be mages that use time-based abilities instead of fire, frost, or arcane. Blizzard even said they experimented with mages being able to turn back time to heal players. So a Time Mage spec could be added to give mages a healing spec. Time Mages are already in the game, as that's what most of the Bronze Dragonflight is. So lore-wise, that could be where players learn how to do it. Plus, mages already have time-based spells, as the mage version of Bloodlust is basically just a time spell that increases the speed of time on all players to give them haste. At number 6, we've got Spellbreakers. I'm not sure if there's enough 2 Spellbreakers to make them a full class, but maybe a 4 spec for warriors or paladins could work or something. Spellbreakers were a unit in Warcraft 3 who specialized in countering magic users, as they could steal spells and mana burn. Spellbreakers are already in the game, and all of them are pretty much exclusively Blood Elves. Spellbreakers in lore were pretty much just an elite guard that trained under Kael'thas, and then decided not to train anymore after Kael'thas' betrayal. But later on, Lor'themar told them to train more, and they are heavily involved in Mists of Pandaria and are everywhere that the Blood Elves are. So all of the things are already in place for them to be added. They exist in-game, and have a group of people already training more of them. But how would one even play? How can you have a whole class that just revolves around countering spellcasters? I'd assume they just play like paladins and have normal abilities and just do bonus effects to spellcasters. Kinda like how some paladin abilities used to have all kinds of bonus effects to undeads. Or just straight up couldn't be used unless it was against them. Number 5, Dragonsworn. This could also technically just be a new race. Basically, you're a dragon, and you can do dragon things, like turn into a big ass dragon and crush shit, or use magic like Chromie and never use your dragon form. There are already plenty of Dragonsworn in the game, as pretty much every dragon from one of the 5 major dragon flights could be considered one, as they can all transform into a human form and use some kind of magic. A Dragonsworn being added to the game would be more about which dragon flight would join which faction, and how would you be able to balance them to work for both sides. You could even have a full spec of Dragonsworns who just use shouts for everything. Number 4, the Blademaster. Another unit from Warcraft 3. Blademasters are very similar to warriors, but they can use non-magical special abilities, like create clones of themselves and stealth. A Blademaster could be like Samuro from Heroes of the Storm and just focus solely on creating clones to do everything, which is something I would love. There's this hero in Dota 2 called Phantom Lancer, who is like Samuro but on steroids. He creates clones to get away, he can create clones on his special attacks, and he creates clones at random whenever he attacks normally. Plus, his clones can also create clones. So if it wasn't for a limit on the number he could have out, or the limited duration of the clones, you could have an infinite clone army. That is definitely something I'd love to see in WoW. Just make Blademasters a 4th warrior spec, they're already pretty similar anyway, and just make them summon a shit ton of clones like Phantom Lancer.
But there is nothing you can... What? Did you think we had forgotten? Did you think we had forgiven? Behold now, the terrible vengeance of the Forsaken!
Number 3, the Alchemist/Apothecary. Again, another unit in Warcraft 3, and exists in WoW as very prominent figures. Grand Apothecary Putris, the undead famous for the Wrathgate fiasco, was technically an alchemist. An alchemist could be a class that just uses potions for everything, to buff themselves and to deal damage to their opponents, and then just give them a whole set of normal abilities and just give those spells and abilities a potion theme to them. What they could also probably do is make a spec revolving around transmutations, and just have them do all kinds of crazy stuff, like in the anime Full Metal Alchemist, where they use alchemy in that show basically like magic. There are tons of alchemists and apothecaries in game already, plus alchemy is already a profession, so turning it into a playable class would be a very easy thing to introduce, lore-wise. At number 2, we've got engineers/tinkers. Again, like the alchemists, this is already a profession in-game, and was a Warcraft 3 unit. Plus, there are notable tinkers in-game already, like Gazlo and Gebelin Mechantorg. Funny enough, Gallywix is also technically a tinker, as during the Goblin starting zone he fights with a robot spider, and participates in the demon invasions in a mech as well. Now, as to how a tinker could function in-game, well, there are so many different things that it's basically up to Blizzard's imagination. They could just give them guns to fire at range and then throw bombs, use mechs as a spec or a cooldown, build turrets or robots, use rocket boots as a speed boost. The possibilities are endless. And at number 1, we've got the Necromancer, or even possibly the Lich. The Necromancer is probably the second most requested class to play after the Demon Hunter. And we finally got the Demon Hunter, so it's only natural that a Necromancer would be next. A Necromancer plays very similar to how the Unholy Death Knight plays, in that it would involve summoning a ton of zombies to fight for you. Of course, there could be so much more. I mean, the Necromancer is also a playable character in Diablo, and has so many spells and abilities to copy from that game that Blizzard wouldn't even have to try that hard. Plus, it was a unit in Warcraft 3 as well. I think the biggest obstacle to Necromancers would be to how to introduce them in lore. I'd assume probably the same way they allow other evil classes like the Warlocks, Death Knights, and Demon Hunters in. Sure, they're doing some morally questionable things, but they're doing them for the right reasons. Plus, adding Necromancers would be a good way for Blizzard to actually do something with Gunther Arcanus. He's a lich in the Undead starting zone who had his questline associated with him removed with the Cataclysm revamp, but he was kept in the game. Now he just sits on an island in the middle of a lake with a bunch of mindless zombies roaming around. According to lore, he was such a powerful Necromancer that when he was killed and raised as an undead, he broke free from the Lich King's control before all the other undeads could, and turned himself into a lich without actually becoming a giant floating frost skeleton. The only lich in game like that, I might add. During the quest chain in vanilla, you were charged with convincing him that other undeads had also managed to break free from the Lich King, and that he should join the Forsaken. And at the end of the questline, he tells the player that he plans to teach necromancy in Undercity. So there we have the person who could teach necromancy to the Horde, and Blizzard could just have that one friendly lich in the Death Knight Order Hall teach it to the Alliance, or just invent a new character to do it. Both Necromancers and Liches were units in Warcraft 3, exist in game already. The Horde has someone who could teach them, and are very popular. I think it's really only a matter of time before they're added.